What? A child that is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. Story do you have? A kid who was relentlessly bullied at my school for years sued the district and got an upper six-figure settlement. Someone I used to have in a support group I once helped run for sexually victimized and abused young men shared with us what happened to him. I'm not going into the finer details of it, but the broad stroke is he was being victimized by a top. He went to other teachers, school admins, and even police. No one believed him, and he even got punished for making it up to get a staff member in trouble. It destroyed his personality. He became bitter, resentful, spiteful, and generally hateful of other people. He was improving his demeanor in the group, but from what he tells us, he just wanted to watch the world die. At the time, a couple years later, that same Ta tripped down the stairwell in one of the side hallways of the school, and he happened to be nearby. He saw she was badly injured and likely had broken bones and was bleeding from her head. Instead of helping her, he literally stepped over her and pretended she wasn't there. Security footage showed he wasn't the one to push her, but when asked why he didn't say anything or get help, he simply said that last time he tried to tell people about something involving her, no one helped, so why would they this time? One of my friends from elementary school, he's the typical middle child. His brother is 11 years older and his sister is 5 years younger. So of course he faces all the actual consequences for his other siblings' actions. Rules he didn't like were because of stuff his brother did when his brother was a kid. If his sister did something stupid, it was his fault because he should have stopped her. His wants and needs were never the priority. If he wanted money, no, because it went to his brother in college. If he wanted friends to come over, no, because sister already had people coming over. Haha, to wear his brother's old clothes, but of course his sister got new clothes. Yada yada, you get the picture. When he was 16, he went out on a late-night food run, and while waiting in the drive-thru, someone rear-ends him pretty hard. Does a not insignificant amount of damage to his parents' car. The other driver takes full responsibility, offers to pay for repairs. Just an unfortunate accident. Well, his parents revoke his car privileges because he got in an accident, and they had a no accidents policy. Didn't matter, then it wasn't his fault. So he told them that if they took away his car privileges, he will never lend them anything for the rest of his life. They grounded him for saying that. That was about a decade ago, and he has never once given them anything. No money, no car, not even housing. He literally made his parents get a hotel. Once. He said he would forgive them if they apologized. To my knowledge, they have not apologized. By the way, his sister was involved in an accident a few years back where she was at fault. And her parents not only paid for the repairs to her car, but also are helping her pay for her car insurance. Now, I was lied to by HR, and it led to me not getting a promotion. I basically put them in a position where I couldn't be replaced and messed with the Excel codes I made for them that saved managers 6 hours a day. I didn't correct what I knew would get us high fees since it wasn't technically my job. Then IQ it. $700K in fines, nobody trained to do. Scheduling, department without anyone to run it, and additional work for the managers was the damage. I started getting calls to help them fix it. I'm sure you can imagine how well that went for them. One of my friends in high school was a major overachiever. Stayed at school or work as much as possible, to the point where he may have spent an hour or less at home a day. He would always deflect questions about his home life, but confided in me that it was bad. Calling him the black sheep of the family would be a major understatement. His family had some money, not millionaire or billionaire, but better off than most, and they told him from elementary school he would always be useless and never amount to anything. He is making bank after getting through college and finding a bomb job with a big pharmaceutical company. Meanwhile, his father's company, that has been in the family for a few generations, got picked apart by the government. Someone tipped them off that he was lying on taxes, hiring immigrants for next to nothing, hiding OSHA violations, and much more. As the dust was settling and the damage was really being seen, my buddy drove to his former family home and dropped off a file. The same file he gave an attorney that gave it to the government, and only said, "Who won't amount to anything? Jim." Not his real name, of course. Anyway, Jim moved to my school in 5th grade. He was socially awkward, but you could tell that he wanted to have friends. But for some reason, he was a complete social pariah. Was it because of his weight? I honestly don't know. It's not like he was the only big boy in the school. But for some reason, Jim got singled out. He was tormented mercilessly. I'll give Jim credit. He took it. But how could that not get to him? Still, he took it. For years. Finally, one kid went too far. In the 8th grade, some SS hole accidentally spilled his lunch all over Jim. Jim was sitting by himself, of course, and Randy thought it would be funny to humiliate Jim in the cafeteria. That particular day, the school had served something messy like chicken fried steak or spaghetti or something like that for lunch. Something that gets everywhere if you spill it. And spill it, Randy did. All over Jim, and Jim snapped. I mentioned that Jim was heavy. What that translated to, apparently, was immense physical strength. Nobody had been paying attention all those times in PE when Jim would climb the little rope thing without using his legs to pull himself up. He was a powerhouse. And Randy poked the bear one time too many. Randy's face was a mess of blood and bruises. Jim gave Randy exactly as much mercy as everyone had given him. Which is to say, absolutely zero. Randy's parents filed a lawsuit against the school district, but I have no idea what came out of that. All I know is that Jim and Randy were never seen at the school again. The teachers and principals all understood what Jim was up against. There's no way they didn't know how miserable he was. But school is a lot like prison. The people in authority don't actually care what happens to you. All they want is for your hit to stay off of them. As long as you don't make your problems their problems, they're fine with whatever. So, Jim was left to twist in the wind. As victims always are, a few years after graduation, Jim was in the news. He had robbed a convenience store and then gotten shot to death by the cops. The news coverage mentioned a troubled childhood filled with violence. But I was around for a good bit of his childhood. And on my watch, except for one occasion, the trouble and violence were completely one-sided. Jim couldn't get a fair deal even in death. Even the news media had to pile on. As a kid who was beaten for years by mother and stepfather and dad knew this but wouldn't help me in the slightest way and treated me horribly, I can honestly say that as the kid who would take care of an ailing parent, I will now, as an adult, tell that now ailing parent that they are on their own to fend for himself. I met this kid while in junior high. Knew him his first year in high school. Back in 78-79's. Remember the movie, Carrie? He had that for a mother. He was super religious and had to pray multiple times a day. Carried a large Bible with his school books. Wore old-fashioned formal clothes, 1950s style haircut, and horned rim. Glasses. His mother punished him because she saw us talking when he got off the school bus. I guess I didn't pass the friend standard. He was so unsocialized and awkward. He was grateful to speak with anyone. And I didn't make fun of him. I guess it got to be too much. He didn't come back to school for the sophomore year. I later learned that while his mother was sleeping, he doused her with gasoline and set her in the bed on fire. She lived. And they just disappeared. I never heard of him again. When working at a daycare, I had a pair of boys in my class, Matt and John, fake names, of course, full offense. John was trash. He was violent, hitty, foul-mouthed, incooperative, and frankly, just not cut out for daycare. Kid was a budding psychopath. He never acted like this around anyone but me. He was a huge favorite among the staff that didn't work with him so much so that they thought I lied about or exaggerated his behavior until the day he stabbed me. Now the other one. My burn the village boy. God. He was the one everyone said was misbehaved, but like John, his behavior with me was completely different. I treated Matt the way I treated all my kids. I found him to be cheerful, helpful with younger kids, bright and eager to learn new things. I consider the fact that I was the first teacher to engage with Matt in a positive way and also the first to ever tell John no and enforce rules with him. Shortly after I stopped working there, I heard from a former coworker that there had been an incident. Apparently, everything went back to the status quo, where everyone spoils John and acts like he perfect while treating Matt like he had already done something. There was a massive blow-up between him and John in particular, and from I heard, Matt basically hulked out and trashed the place. My heart broke for him. He just wanted attention and structure and absolutely thrived with it. Johnny did discipline and structure of a different kind, but instead was coddled and enabled. The results were inevitable. I'm just sad it resulted in Matt getting kicked out. I hope he landed at a new school with teachers who actually cared about him. That entire center was a mess of bullshit like that. Favoritism, abuse, hitty staff behavior, attitudes, etc. A guy the first went to high school with burned the bridge with his entire family. We weren't best friends, more of a friend type of situation, so my info is a lot of hearsay. But I do know some things for certain. He was the middle child, with an older sister and a younger brother. His parents had owned a diner and it had been in his family for a few generations. It was an unspoken rule that the kids of each generation would help out when they were little, and eventually take it over to keep it in the family. The problem was none of them wanted anything to do with it. It was the easiest way to set him off, even mentioning it would have him go from 0 to 100 real quick. This didn't stop either of intend to start. His parents though, they would joke about how the kids didn't need to worry about college, or moving away. All of that would be taken care of when they would run the diner. The sister, being the oldest, was the first really pressured into it. Buddha and his brother told her to get out and don't look back, and don't let them guilt trip you. So shed it, and goes to college on a sports scholarship. And then moves a few states away. She occasionally visits but more or less left the town in her rearview mirror. Then it was his turn, but unfortunately he didn't have the money to get away, so his parents tell him to go to community college and work at the diner to save money. This is where the issue started. The younger brother doesn't go to college and decides to go couch surfing and backpacking across the country for a few years, occasionally coming back to work for a few weeks when he needed the money, only to take off again. So my friend gets left running the place, despite swearing he never would. I'd see him around sometimes at bars, and he was a bitter shell of his former self with a bad drinking problem and a series of failed relationships. His parents didn't seem to care that their son was a depressed alcoholic, so long as their family legacy stayed the same. He confided in me how they were pushing them to get married and give them grandkids, to settle down and let go of this silly dream of starting over when he has the diner. Which, given how shit-faced he was in nearly every interaction he had with him, it's impressive he was able to run it. His sister and brother couldn't be bothered to come down and help, and in fact they started to agree with the parents that he should just cut his loss and make this life work for him. One day, he drops off the face of the earth. Nobody say or hears from him for 3 weeks. His parents say went on a vacation, and they also hadn't heard from him. Then suddenly he's back in town. Seemingly in much better spirits, looking healthier than we had seen him in years. About 2 months later the diner is torn down and replaced with some other business. As it turns out, his girlfriend at the time gave him an ultimatum. Quit the drinking and go to therapy or we're done. So he does, and the therapist points out the obvious things linking his depression and says he should take a vacation and figure out what else he wants to do with his life. He went to Vegas, partied for 2 weeks and admittedly thought about killing himself. After getting it out of his system, he devises a plan to sell the diner and pocket the money for himself. Everything was in his name as the owner anyway, so was pretty easy. He took the best offer he could, and used that money to leave town. The brother and sister didn't get a dime, and the parents were already retired. He moved to the other side of the country with his now wife, and we follow each other on social media, but he seems much happier. Apparently he hasn't spoken a word to his family in years, nor they to him, and does not. For 53 years, my father gaslit me and always made me feel like one day he would be a real father. Well, he's in his 80s and has Parkinson's and is married to a terrible woman, and I no longer help him or my stepmother in their old age because they are such terrible people. Now, they have to find other people to give them rides, to lift things, to listen to doctors, etc. Oh, I also informed my stepmother that the day my father dies and while she is picking out a casket, I will march into the IRS to report her for committing tax fraud with my father. There is no statute of limitations and I want her to sweat every time she hears him cough, sneeze, or moan. F them. I'd say the majority of bullied kids who turn to crime have that story. There was that nuclear revenge post about a guy ostracized by the entire town, I think cause he was born out of wedlock, and after getting out of there became an inspector of some kind. Eventually he was given a list of factories that needed reviewing, a donate needed to close. The factory in his hometown was on the list. He goes there, inspects, they act all buddy-buddy thinking they're safe from closure. Boy, we're 3 wrong. Every infraction, breach of safety, incorrect anything went into his report. The whole town basically was built around that factory, and when it shut down the town was desolate and dead within a few years. Deleted. I'm a lesbian and was pretty much outcasted by my family when I came out. They were all pretty abusive. I still babysat my sisters a lot because I wanted a relationship. For reference, I'm 22 and they're 6 months and 4. Recently, my girlfriend and I were able to get custody. My mom is pretty much out of the picture. At this point, That whole side of the family that ousted me either wants custody or visitation with the babies. They get nothing. The last grandchild, the baby of the family, the cute little princess they all want to hold and dress up. But God forbid she has an opinion. They get nothing now. Veteran teacher here. Sometimes, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. I had a student who would act foolish, taunt other kids, and just be a total jerk until another kid would finally get fed up and challenge him. He would then cry, "I'm so tired of being bullied." Then, kids would totally ignore his ridiculousness, and he would cry, "I have no friends. Everybody hates me." Always the victim, always blaming others for his bad behavior. My mother was abusive to my sister and I growing up. Sis ended up anorexic, has been in therapy her whole life, took years and years to fix herself and still isn't there. I ended up with bad generalized anxiety, social anxiety, depression and self-loathing, and was emotionally and verbally abusive in past relationships. My mom used to make us promise we'd never put hair in a home when she got old. Last year my mental problems came to a head, and I started therapy, medication, and being honest with my parents about my mom's abuse. I gave the man ultimatum of either acknowledging the damage and taking responsibility by apologizing for it so we could move forward, or I'd never speak with them again. My dad apologized immediately. He was less abusive than she was, and held more guilt than she ever did. We're on good terms now. My mother denies everything and has been totally cut off by my sister and she will end up in an old folks home after all. She has no children left. Consequences of her own actions, so I didn't burn down a village but I did burn down that relationship. The axe forgets, but the tree remembers. Quite a literal version. Had a kid come to my 9th grade classroom with 4 felony arson counts. We knew before he got there that he had 4 felonies, just not in what and his other 3 teachers and the principal called an emergency meeting where they didn't want him in their rooms at all. Principal wanted us to either give up our planning or teach him after regular hours. I adamantly told them to get ucked that I wouldn't give my planning up for God himself, and least restrictive environment said he was in the classroom. TBF, I already had a room full of gang members, so what was another kid with felonies? Turns out this kid has never met his dad and his mom worked 3 to 4 jobs. Only got to see her like Ma Ibe once a week. He was breaking into homes for food and then burning them down for attention. It was really just a cry for help. I liked the kid and he had me first period. Would come in high as a ucking kite and give him cherry coke and bagels to eat. Never skipped my class. Never misbehaved after the first week with me. Everyone hated on him and he lashed out accordingly. Started reading a Orn mag and drinking a 5th of vodka in math class, etc. Ended up getting expelled despite my intervention. Few months later he was arrested and charged as an adult after a string of breaking and entering Witherson and robbery. He got some girlfriend who convinced him to rob places to steal her hit, which OFC he did. BC no one else was acting like they loved him, and OFC he went back to setting fires. Torched at least half a dozen homes. Deleted. My relationship with my parents is at the best, strained. I'm the oldest child of divorced parents and my dad at some point around 9 years old stopped spending time with me. He ended up having 2 more kids for a different woman, both boys, and focused all his time on them and only paid for my schooling. Funnily enough, at this same age I was starting to get sexually abused by my mom's abuser, her uncle. She knowingly left me alone with her abuser on multiple occasions, even over weekends. She also ended up having 2 other kids and I kept them from being abused by allowing him to assault me so he wouldn't see them. I was thankfully raised for the rest of my childhood and even adulthood now by my grandparents who are literal angels. I have told both of my parents that I won't be taking care of them as they get up in age and I won't be helping raise their kids. The only comfort is that although I burnt down the village, I'm now warm. I grew up with a kid named Brody. He was adopted from Russia as an infant and came to America with his adoptive parents. I'm telling you this so I can also say to my knowledge he didn't suffer once he came here. His parents were wealthy, obsessed with him. He got breaks at school, specifically BECAUSEHE was adopted even though he couldn't possibly have any memory of it. Despite this, he relentlessly bullied me and other less popular kids at our middle school. He would hit boys, girls, and anyone in between just for icing him off. He threw things specifically at people's faces so it would hurt more. He just hated everyone. It got to the point that my mother was afraid to leave meet birthdays, events with him because she was Scared he'd hurt me as I was his favorite victims because I often fought back and would get into trouble instead of him as a result. Anyways, IDK where he is now, but studying child psychology and reading some of the recent research that's gone out. That kid was affected incredulously as an infant by having almost no physical touch from his early caregivers. That's the only explanation I have for it. Edit to say I understand that he didn't have to remember to have trauma or attachment issues stemming from his infanthood. I actually kind of explained that at the end of my post, sorry if you misinterpreted. I also don't think it's his fault was like that, but God amen was he a nasty sob.